Hi, my name is Beth Franklin. I am a front-end developer here with Grit Health, and we want to thank you so much for joining our Grief is Not Linear, the Nuances of Moving Through Loss session. We appreciate you taking the time to be here today. Remember, today's sessions are informational only. For any medical advice and decision-making, please consult your personal medical staff. We ask that you please be respectful of everyone's lived experiences. And thank you again for joining. I'll go ahead and turn it over to our wonderful speakers, Gracelyn and Melody.
Thank you for joining us today. My name is Melody, and this is my niece, Gracelyn, and we are the co-founders of Luna Peak Foundation. We're a foundation that celebrates life, and we humanize taboo topics like cancer and grief. And today we're going to be talking about grief and loss. We create books that celebrate life. So we have some books we're going to introduce you to that help people when they're facing life-changing loss or a cancer diagnosis. And we focus on multicultural stories, and we like to uplift everybody.
So we can get started with a few polls. We'd love to know what you guys have experience in and generally what your comfort level is surrounding death and grief in general. So feel free to answer the poll if you feel comfortable. Wow, okay.
So a lot of you have experienced loss and supporting other people, which is something that we focus a lot on.
Great, thank you all for sharing.
So the reason we ask about the comfort level in discussing death is it's something that is, everyone is very different. So when we're speaking with new people, we like to see where they land. And so this is a very open group. Thank you guys.
Great. And for the people who feel uncomfortable or mildly uncomfortable, thank you for showing up and thank you for coming to learn something today about the experience.
So like I said before, I'm Melody. I am a child cancer survivor and a grief survivor. I was diagnosed with ALL leukemia when I was 6 years old, and I took chemotherapy for 3 years. So I was 6 until 9 years old as a cancer patient. I was given 12 months to live upon diagnosis, and was given a 50% chance at living 12 months. Sorry, it's hard to explain that, which is very scary for a family. I was the youngest of 5, so it rocked our world. And knowing that death was a possibility, my parents were very open with me, which in the 80s was not very common. Most of my friends that had cancer did not know that death was a possibility. Some people didn't even know they had cancer. They didn't know why they were being treated. So my parents were open with me with everything. And I even planned my own funeral. So that was very forward for the time. I've lost many people in my life. The first person being my grandfather, who passed away from cancer 1 month before I was diagnosed. So my only background with cancer was a death. So it was a very scary time. Beyond my grandfather, after that was all of my friends. So being a leukemia patient, my roommates, my friends that I played with in the social worker's office, like all of the people surrounding me, I would say most passed away. There's a handful of us adult survivors of cancer from the 80s because it was not very common to survive. Thankfully now, a leukemia diagnosis exactly like my own is a 90% chance of survival. And Gracelyn is also a grief survivor, and I'll let her talk about herself a little bit.
So I come to the table because my dad passed away very suddenly. It wasn't from cancer, but it was an unanticipated death. And the way that we all coped with that was to turn outward. I think this was my first life-changing loss where, I think just the rug was pulled out from underneath me and, pretty much all of our close family members. And we had never experienced anything like this. I felt like I was in such a negative space. I didn't know how to move forward from this. So what I did was to turn outwards. I had to look around and, crowdsource how other people got through this. I saw so many other people who had lost a dad, lost other parents, lost siblings, lost children. And I peripherally knew all of these people, but we had never had any conversations about it. And so in talking to them, I realized, okay, well, these people figured it out. Oh, let me see how. I want to be able to smile and laugh again, because I think when something so groundbreaking happens to you and the life you thought you were living is ending, it's really hard to see forward from that and to think, oh, I'm still going to have a happy life after this, even though it's nothing like what I thought it would be. So we decided to embark on these really large scale photography projects and to figure this out. Melody started with a book, Beyond Remission, and that's a book that she wished she had during her entire diagnosis and through her own treatment and through healing and survivorship. And we decided to apply that same question, what does life after cancer look like? And we started a project to see, what does life after loss look like? How do you rebuild after something so terrible happens? And we were able to interview over 200 people through each of these projects, and we interviewed them across the US. And we really got into the nitty gritty, and we asked them these questions, and we asked them how they got through the worst thing they've ever experienced on camera. And thankfully, so many people came to the table to share. And I think part of that is what we'll get into a little bit later, is that people are not asked enough about their grief. They're not asked enough about their treatment, how they're doing, and checking in with them. And just because cancer or grief happened at one point in your life, that actually extends for the rest of your life as well. Cancer is a lifelong journey, and grief is also a lifelong journey. So, in getting their stories and crowdsourcing such a diverse group of people, we were able to humanize these topics, because it's one thing to read a book about someone's cancer story. It's one thing to read a book about somebody's grief, but it's another thing to talk with someone who you can relate to. We wanted people to see themselves in these stories. We wanted to show specifically the eyes and faces and these portraits that we were taking so that people could jump into the story. A lot of times I reference people's stories in some of the books. Basically, we made these books while we were healing as well. And so, we kind of take a page out of each person's healing journey and apply it to our own. I oftentimes think of how this specific person healed, or this note about what they said about 3 years after loss, how I might feel then. And we oftentimes reference back some of the advice that they have. But overall, we try to boost representation in both the cancer and grief spaces. And, with the task of using photography to humanize these topics, we wanted to make sure that people actually felt represented. Oftentimes people who are able to share and people who are given a platform to share, that can be a homogenous group. So we really wanted to be able to, we started this by wanting to see ourselves in these stories. And we made sure that it was a very diverse pool of people who we interviewed. So that's a little bit about how we coped and, what types of resources that we create to hopefully help other people cope as well.
And I just want to touch really quickly on our background and why we love to hear stories and tell stories, is that we are both sociologists. I studied at UC Irvine and got my BA in sociology with a minor in art history, and Gracelyn got her BS from Santa Clara and her master's from Columbia. So we both love the study of people. So that is why we decided that we would be able to create these books and share with others.
All right, so if we're talking about primary loss, we wanted to say a little bit about what this means to have a primary loss and a secondary loss, and how we can show up for other people and how we can show up for ourselves. So the primary loss in this case would be the actual loss. So the death of a loved one, the anticipated death of a loved one, a cancer diagnosis. And the secondary loss would be all of the losses that you experience because of that primary loss. And I don't think the secondary losses are talked about enough. So in this case, in a grief context, this could mean job insecurity. This could mean financial insecurity. It is very expensive to die, and it's very expensive to go through the probate process and also closing an estate. So, you know, whether you need to take time off of work, that kind of puts you in an unstable situation. And this kind of, you know, trickles down into the type of support that you might not get. And that in itself is a secondary loss too. You get people leaving your life. There are people who can't show up for you. Maybe they don't have the capacity for it. Maybe they're afraid of loss itself and they think it's contagious and they don't want to show up. And they're scared. There are so many reasons why you might also lose relationships during this time. There's also burnout. For a lot of caregivers, I mean, it's really just a marathon to go through supporting someone through their end of life process, and then also dealing with your own grief. So all of these things can be secondary losses and really, really tough to go through. You might not have had the chance to say goodbye. That's another secondary loss that you might experience. You might be mourning the loss of the life you thought you were going to live, and things look a little bit different. You might lose a romantic relationship. You might get divorced after loss. You might lose a job after loss for various reasons, or move on to a different job. All of these things are losses. And if you felt any of these, you're definitely not alone. And the term everyone grieves differently is thrown out a lot, and we've heard that a lot too. And I think the way that this was really driven home was in interviewing over 80 grief survivors to actually see how they have navigated all of these things, because it's really difficult. And I think that's part of, one, hearing their authentic life story and to see really how they have been navigating this very tough road. And also it's a celebration. It's a celebration of making it, of still taking it a day at a time, taking a step forward. And even if that's a really small win, it's still a win. And so kind of the common thread through the work that we do in getting people's stories is also celebration.
And when you're looking at this also, primary loss and secondary loss, it applies to cancer as well. So obviously the primary would be having cancer, but secondary, there's so much of yourself that you've lost, the person you thought you were going to be, the people around you can leave, your job. So for those of you that said, you know, cancer has touched your life, you can obviously apply the same graph to that.
And a lot of times the secondary losses, they're not as, you know, they're not as tangible sometimes. You know, you might not know that people are battling so much more, right? And that's why we have this depiction here of an iceberg, right? Look at all the stuff hiding underneath the surface. It's never just the loss that you are dealing with. There's so much else surrounding it. And I think for grievers who are in this group right now, just know that you're not alone in navigating all of the ins and outs and everything that might not relate to grief, but it actually really does. And also, if you're supporting someone through the process, if maybe they're taking a job loss very hard and you don't understand why, well, it also relates back to the loss and feelings of hopelessness and trying to rebuild and feeling set back after something really huge has happened to them. All right, so mostly our language is memes and humor. That's really how we cope with most everything in our life and in our family. So we have these two memes here that we wanted to talk through. These were really popular on our grief page. And the first Shrek one says, when a grief muggle tells you you'll be okay, when a grief survivor tells you you'll be okay. So we highlight this because so many people ask us, what should I say when someone is grieving? And I'll say, being a supporter is a very hard job. Grief is very awkward. It is a very tough thing to navigate for both the griever and the supporter. Having said that, there are definitely some things that you can, keep an eye out for, especially thinking of the content of what you want to say, the context of what you want to say and when you say it, and also your tone. So in this case here, this relates back to a lot of people who say, oh, I understand exactly how you feel. Well, unless this is someone who has experienced a loss or a cancer diagnosis of the same type, how could you know how they feel, right? It's such a humongous experience. So I think it makes a difference right? If someone is telling you you're going to be okay and they don't have any experience at all with what you're going through, that's really hard to believe. But when somebody who has walked a similar path can say, hey, you're going to be okay. When I look at a grief survivor who has survived the loss of their dad 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 60 years, like what we've interviewed people for, it hits differently. And I believe them when they tell me that I'm going to be okay. And, you know, again, it's the tone of how you say it, right? Being able to say, I know exactly how you feel, well, that feels pretty invalidating, right? We're all different. We all grieve differently. So, you know, you gotta leave space for them to feel all of their feelings. And it's a delicate line, especially for giving someone hope, but also not bright-siding them in a situation or just assuming that they are going to get better. Well, what if it doesn't feel like it will get better? That's really hard to take in as a griever. And then the meme on the right, Jason Momoa, our favorite, it's kind of showing that holiday grief kind of creeps up on you. There are certain times of the year and certain seasons and certain dates that are heavier for some people with their grief. So definitely listen and learn as you go. Give yourself grace as a supporter, give yourself grace as a griever. When you're going through it, there are just some days that hit harder than most. And it's okay if some days completely level you, specifically your own birthday, your dead loved one's birthday, anniversary of their death, maybe some holidays, or it even could be a diagnosis date of your loved one who has passed. And sometimes you kind of don't even know why you're feeling a certain way. And then later it might become a little bit clearer. But definitely the content of what you say matters, the context, and also the tone.
Yeah, and when we show this meme with Shrek about when a grief survivor tells you you'll be okay, there's a connection between survivors, grief and cancer, that you just have this, you know, this sameness that really makes you feel comfortable. So if you're not a grief survivor or a cancer survivor, what I found is finding connections, I connect people. So if I can't, if I don't know about your grief because I haven't lost my father, I can connect you with somebody that I know that has similarities and is able to help you through that. So I think that that's another way to support people is by connecting them with others that you can help each other.
All right, so even more memes. This is something I didn't know about grief before I went through it. As a supporter, before I understood grief, I thought this was a singular moment that you experience. And maybe it's going to be bad for 2 weeks. Maybe you'll cry for a month and that's it. Then you continue living the rest of your life. And that is not at all what grief is like. And so what we wanted to highlight in both of these photos was actually the fact that grief can be talked about. It should be talked about. Not everyone feels comfortable sharing about it, and that's totally fine too. But you never know if somebody actually does want to share. Just because their loved one has passed, it doesn't mean that they didn't live. And the relationship that you have with your loved one continues, maybe in a different way, but all of those memories still exist. The love still exists. So what we like to encourage is for people to talk about it. We open up a door to help them share, and we got such a great response from it in our own project. I mean, when we reached out to people to share about their grief on camera and to have their stories in a published book and their faces in a published book, we assumed 5 people would say yes, mostly out of, you know, just being friend. We had over 80. I mean, we ended up having to stop the project at some point because we had so many participants and so many people who wanted to share because they are so rarely asked about their loved ones. And I would say at least half the people who we interviewed would remark how this is the most they've ever talked about their grief. And something notable is one of our participants who was 66 years out of losing his mom was actually one of those people to say, I have never told anyone this before. And that's 6 decades of grief that has been untapped and pushed down. And he had such incredible insights. I mean, all of this should be shared if you want to share. So all this to say, it's okay to talk about your grief if you would like to, and it's okay to ask about someone's grief. And kind of going back to our previous slide, it depends on the tone, it depends on the context. Maybe you don't want to do this in the workplace. Maybe you want to have more of a private conversation with someone. And you can kind of just open up a door and ask them about their loved one. What was their name? What did you guys like to do together? What were their favorite foods? There are so many questions that you can ask. And, you know, there's so much that you could ask about someone's living relationship with, you know, a sibling, for example. But just because the sibling has passed away, you can still ask those same questions. When do you guys like to hang out? You know, what types of things do you guys like to do together? All of these are different ways to open up a door to get someone to share if they want to, because you never know when it's going to be like this first meme photo and you ask them, you know, what were they like? And it just comes gushing out. But I think it's a really beautiful thing if the person feels safe enough to share, that they're able to disclose some of these things and to keep their person alive.
And also what we've heard quite often from a supporter is that they don't want to bring up the loss because they don't want to remind the person or make them feel again. But you're not, the person like, they don't forget that their person passed. They know. So you bringing it up is not going to make them feel worse. So I always encourage people to ask about their loved ones and asking about stories. So if you look at our website, which is lunapeakfoundation.org, we do have some free resources there if you have questions about how to approach a griever and how to support somebody.
And also some well-meaning condolences that we have. I know society doesn't really prep us to talk about this in a meaningful way. I think we just want to push people through the process and everybody get over it so that we can all feel better about it. But some things are sad, and it's okay to sit in the sadness, and it's okay to be honest. Something that we like to do is to always push honesty. And I think it's the same. It's like, you know, when Melody walks into a pediatric oncology ward, you know, you're not going to brush over the fact that you're talking to a young cancer patient who doesn't have any hair. Like, it's okay to talk about these things and ask if they prefer a bandana, right?
They know they don't have hair.
Yeah.
You know, so it's the same with grief and loss. You know, your person is no longer here. And by talking about them, it's healing. Anyway, okay.
A lot of times people will say, I'm sorry for your loss. And, you know, again, going back to the content, it's nice to hear those types of sentiments. People have mixed responses to that. But a lot of people do not like when anyone starts a conversation with at least you had them for this amount of time, at least XYZ. It's kind of a forced situation where, I guess I have to be grateful for something during loss. And that's okay if that happens later. It's okay if you feel that way too. But anyone who currently has all the things that you are missing coming in to say, well, at least you have this to be thankful for, that's not really well received generally from everyone we've talked to.
Right. At least you had them for X amount of years. I know someone that only had their person for this many years. So those are not helpful things. They would want you to be happy. So that's another one that, of course they would want you to be happy. You know, it's not
I'm crying.
Right. Of course they would, but it's not like my job right now to be happy. And then I know how you feel. We already went over that. But you know, that one still is, it's almost hurtful sometimes, because if somebody doesn't know how you feel, you're like, thanks.
I'll never share anything with you again.
And then you should be over this by now. That one is extremely hurtful because, you know, a phrase that's often used is grief comes in waves. So like, maybe I'll seem fine and then it hits me, and then I seem fine and then it hits me. So there is no timeline of when you should be over grief, and that's absolutely okay.
And the last one we wanted to point out was, I can't imagine losing what you've lost. And I think the idea behind that is trying to kind of give support. And I think that is definitely very well-meaning. Some people do not take that well because you can't imagine how terrible that is. So, you know, maybe avoiding things like that and just giving something a little bit more encouraging and something a little bit opening up the door to share. And overall, people are going to share if they feel comfortable with you. And again, like Melody said, if you're not the person to relate to the specific situation, you can absolutely refer them to someone else and help them find even a therapist or some other type of Instagram community or support group. There are so many resources out there that no one really is alone. So it's okay if you can't relate, and it's okay if you outsource their support as well.
And then like some good things you can say. I mean, we've been talking about some of the things that aren't well received, but what we've found to be well received is just a check-in. You know, how are you doing? It's okay if you can't respond right now, but I just want you to know I'm thinking about you. Or is there something I can do for you is a great starter, but sometimes people aren't in the space to know exactly what they need. You know, it's not their job to tell you, I need X, Y, Z. So if you could say, hey, do you want me to do your laundry? Hey, can I pick up your kids from school? Hey, there's a basket of snacks at your front door. Those are really helpful things that we found people really respond well to. And unfortunately, you know, we are surrounded with grievers. So we've dropped a lot of those baskets, and they are very well received and helpful. Any other good things?
Just the power of a handwritten note, also full of people who just want to say, you've been on my mind. I think sometimes we overuse thoughts and prayers a lot. And again, that's very well-meaning. But maybe can we change the lingo a little bit? Is there a variation so that there aren't 100 comments on a post that you wrote that all they say is thoughts and prayers, right? Even changing it slightly, you've been on my mind, or I'm thinking of you. My heart is with you. All of these things are generally pretty well received. Just last night, actually, we dropped off a care package to one of our participants in our Beyond Remission cancer photography book, and she is now metastatic. And so in writing a letter to her, it was pretty much all of these things. You're on our mind. We're going to be with you every step of the way. Don't be shy about reaching out. I offered to help drive her to some appointments. Is there anything we can help with schedule wise? And I think a lot of times we assume that people are surrounded by support, and sometimes it's actually not the case. So just making it clear, even if there's some kind of errand, any of the small annoying things that you have to deal with in life, can I grab some of those from you? And letting them know your number or your email, however it's best to communicate and get a hold of you, and say that you're eager to help. If you do have the capacity to help, that's something that I think is really powerful to say. But again, being a supporter is very hard work. And it's okay if you don't have the capacity sometimes, and it's okay to outsource a lot of that support too. All right, so one of our favorite parts of talking with grievers is actually just seeing the type of mementos that they keep. So this is part of our photography book, Beyond Grief. And we asked all of our participants to bring a memento, something physical and tangible that reminds them of their loved one, even though their loved one is no longer here. And we had the most beautiful stories result from just doing this little show and tell with each one of our participants. So we wanted to highlight a few of the really out of the box ways that they all celebrate their loved ones. And I think it sheds light on the grief experience and also how to support others. Can you join in on any of these things that we're mentioning? So one of our participants, Shanae, is first, the top left photo and the one right next to it as well in the middle. Her mom was battling metastatic breast cancer. And at some point in time, her mom decided to stop treatment. So she had about 6 months left to prepare. And so she was very honest about the situation. We were very inspired hearing about the ways in which her mom rejected wigs, and she had like a whole wig party, but she was fine going bald too. And I think she was very death positive for this being a loss almost 15 years ago. So what her mom decided to do was to set aside gifts for her and her sister to open at various milestones after she passes. So at the time, this participant, Shanae, was only in high school. And so by the time she graduated high school, she had no idea that her mom had set up this ring for her. And then when she graduated college, she got a watch that her mom used to wear at that age in her life too. And so these are all secret gifts. When Shanae received them, she had to keep it secret from her younger sister. And her younger sister also, you know, for her first baby, she got a special gift. And we just thought this was such a brilliant way to keep her alive and to keep her a part of the celebrations and milestones, knowing she would not be there for them. So we were very inspired by this story with Shanae. And I think that's also inspired us in the case of, you know, planning anything, even with our own family. It's like that type of honesty and that type of care. And she really set an incredible example for the rest of the family to move forward, not just with the loss, but also with the rest of their lives too.
It was a beautiful, beautiful story. So you can see the twins there, that's Sam and Paige, and they were lovely, and they came and let us interview them and talk about the loss of their mom. And this was a sudden loss, completely unexpected. And both of them had young children at the time. And so they had to come home from the hospital and tell their young children that their grandmother wasn't around anymore. And Paige's daughter said, actually Paige asked her daughter, where do you think grandma went? Because the kids were all talking and trying to figure out, what happens after you die. And I think the answer was fairy dust. She blew away with fairy dust. And so you can see in their hands, they're holding a little box, and it's filled with glitter. And whenever the kids wanted to talk to grandma, they would take the glitter out and blow it into the air to make sure that their grandmother could hear their story. And it's just so touching. And it's such a great way to see how little minds will cope with loss. And it's been helpful to them. And this has been now, I think they're about 3 or 4 years out of loss now. And at the time it was only about 1.5. And they're still doing this. And so I took from this, I know the mother's loss, the day that she was her death anniversary. So every death anniversary, we bring orchids to their house covered in the fairy dust. And the kids come home from school and they're so excited to see fairy dust going up their driveway. So that's a really fun way to be a supporter, and also to help kids heal. And then down below, you see the ukulele, and that is my father and Gracelyn's papa. And he is, his father was my grandfather that I lost a month before I was diagnosed. So, my dad went through a lot at that time, the loss of his own dad, and then his daughter getting cancer. And I don't think anyone really gave him the attention he deserved at the time. He took it all on himself. And he said that nobody had really asked him about his father dying until Gracelyn sat him down one-on-one, and she did this interview with him. And so he's holding the ukulele, and that's meaningful because music was a big part of his childhood. And he likes to play music that his dad used to listen to. And my dad is a musician, and he's a beautiful voice, and we love to hear him sing. And I've heard this song over and over in my life, but I didn't know until we interviewed him the reason why he played it so often. So that was a really beautiful story. And in the center, you'll see the Nalgene bottle, and Laura is holding, so, okay, it's hard for me to tell this story.
It's a lot, yeah.
It's a lot. So basically, her daughter passed away right before her wedding. And so the day that was supposed to be her wedding day, they all gathered together and filled this Nalgene bottle filled with stories and notes to her and notes about her. And they threw it into the ocean. And somebody found it, Fiji, like halfway across the world. And they had their contact information in. And so they were given it back. And it's a beautiful way. And they've done a few more since then. And it's just a way for her to kind of live on, for other people to hear her story. It's a very interesting, unique way to celebrate somebody's life. And that's kind of what we want to do in our book, is to let everybody let all of these grief survivors celebrate the life of the person lost and share that celebration. And so last we have Kimmy, and Kimmy and I went to college together, and she was pregnant with her 3rd child the same time I was with my 3rd. And unfortunately, Kimmy's son was stillborn. And when you're in the hospital and you have a baby, you get to leave. They push you in the wheelchair, and it's kind of this like grand exit because you're holding your baby, and everybody's kind of oohing and awing as you walk past. And your loved ones pull up in the car, and you get in with your new baby. And it's something that you don't get to do when you have a stillborn. And so at the hospital that Kimmy gave birth at, they gave her this bear, and we got to hold the bear. It's weighted, it's very heavy, so it feels more tangible in your hands. And she got to go home holding this, and it's something that they do for all the mothers of stillborns. But she brought it home to her 2 children, and it's still in their room. So they kind of have a reminder of baby Eli in their room, and they talk about him, and they know that they have a brother. And it's just a conversation starter too, because you see the bear in their room and what's the significance of this bear. Even as the kids are getting older and older, they still keep this bear in their room. So these are just a few of our stories that we get to hear. And to us, they're just magical. And we love how people find ways to celebrate. And we find different cultures are doing different things, different age groups are doing different things. Repurposing jewelry seems to be a really big one that we've seen. So the twins, Sam and Paige, you can see that Sam is wearing the necklace around her neck, and that is her mom's wedding ring that was taken apart and put into 3 different necklaces for the 3 daughters. So these are all really great ideas for people that know that they're facing loss, or that you can even do now years after loss.
And again, it's just customizing. The dogs got let out. It's customizing based on who the person is. In the case of Laura and this Nalgene bottle, her daughter's favorite color was pink. So she wanted to make sure it was something very pink and very loud and very like a big grand gesture for her daughter, because that was her. So I think definitely getting creative and knowing who your person is really important here too, when you are thinking about supporting them. Oops. All right, so for anyone curious about how to move through the end of life process, whether you're planning, whether you're supporting someone else going through this process, I would say the first thing to do is to get very specific on what your goals and values are. Are you someone who is eco-conscious? Do you want to be composted? Do you want a green burial? Do you have a faith-based practice? Is that really important for you to do certain rituals? All of these things are really important when you span out and you start to think about not just the treatment, but also your legacy and how you want to be honored and how you want other people to either join you in that process or maybe not join you in that process too. Grief can be quiet, grief can be loud, the way you want to go through your end of life process. Sometimes you want that to be private, and that's totally fine too. But all of that would be narrowing down your goals and values, and that will help guide you and the rest of your support team through the whole process. So every decision you make, it should all go back to these goals and values. And how would you like to be celebrated now and later, whether you do have a terminal diagnosis or not? There's so much you can be doing now to think about your legacy and how you want to be remembered and the type of story that you want to share. And something that we want to note too, and this is the asterisk down here, be mindful with using the correct names and pronouns. And this is specifically for the LGBTQ+ community. If someone has very specific names and pronouns, their name has changed, it's so important to honor that. We want to make sure that however you're celebrating and honoring someone, it's how they wanted that. And again, based on your goals and values. There are so many options these days for end of life planning. There are people who do this for a living. I'm actually also a death doula. I should have mentioned that in the beginning. I recently just became a death doula. So all I do is talk about death and grief. My nickname is Gracelyn. So that's kind of how we approach life, with a lot of honesty, and we're very death positive over here. But a lot of what we do is legacy work, story sharing. And again, that's back to how would you like to be celebrated? And it's back to what are your goals and values? Who are you? What would you like to communicate? How do you want to be honored? All of these things are really important when contemplating, the end of life for someone that you're supporting, if you're on their care team, and also just for yourself. I think being as specific as possible is the best way to go about it, but understanding that not everyone will be ready to talk about death, and that's okay. So some final thoughts on coping. It's worked for us to be very honest and to use humor and dark humor. Again, going back to these goals, all of these ways of approaching whatever situation you're handed in life, you can make it an empowering decision. And again, not everyone is ready to talk about it, and that's okay. And there will be people who maybe, change their comfortability with it throughout the process too. And I think a lot of times the person who is in the position of approaching their death sometimes is able to lead the charge with how they talk about it. And overall, dying is a natural process. Billions and billions of people have done this before us. And I think it's made out to be kind of a scary thing and filled with a lot of fear, but it's a very natural process, and we will all die. And it's okay to need and reach out for additional help. Again, we will always go back to the fact that there is a community out there for whatever affinity group that you are a part of. If there's something about your identity, if there's something about your culture, perhaps you are a part of a certain religion, you want that to be your source of connection with other people. There are communities out there, and there are people who want to talk about it and people who want to connect. It's oftentimes healing both ways.
Okay, so we, like I said at the very beginning, we like to celebrate life. But when we talk about grief, we also like to plan that celebration. So, we started Luna Peak Foundation to build this community, and storytelling is the way we do that. So like you can see here, these are all of the books that we have created, and the services that we like to share with all of you. So we'll start with the first book there you see is Follow Me Cancer Free, and that is little me. You can see me at all three stages where I'm bald at the very back, and then my hair is growing in, and now I'm in the front telling my story. And it's just a cute little rhyming book that kind of takes you through diagnosis and making friends that have cancer, and celebrating your life and the whole process of going through cancer. And then Color Me Cancer Free is the same story, but we've taken out all of the colors, and the kids can draw in themselves. And then at the end, they can write their own story of their own diagnosis and journey. So Kicking Cancer in between the two is a memory book. And it's a kind of a journal, kind of a workbook. We give them prompts. There's some games in there. There's some Mad Libs. And it is a way for kids to memorialize this time. It's a book that I really wish I would have had when I was first diagnosed, because it would be really fun right now to go back and look inside my mind of a little cancer fighter at age 6 through 9. So this book has been very well received by children in the hospital. They fill it out. We've had some send photos of, the inside of their books. And, something that's really wonderful about this book is that it is a memory book for an adult to look back at their childhood journey, but it's also a memory book for those children that don't survive and unfortunately pass. The family will have this memory book. And there's even places for the doctors and nurses to write notes to the kids. So it's very thorough with what's going on with them during their whole cancer journey. And then Beyond Remission and Más allá de la remisión those are our two books. I mean, that is the same book in English and Spanish. And that is our first photography book where we interviewed over 100 survivors of cancer in order for them to send messages to newly diagnosed patients. The idea behind this book is that right when you're diagnosed, you're handed a book full of survivors and how they got through their hardest times and what got them through, really crazy times. So the best, there's a few really funny stories in there, and it's not all humor, but it's very diverse. We made sure we were diverse with cancer types. We made sure we were diverse with age, gender, and, different backgrounds. And then Beyond Grief is, right after Beyond Remission, which is the one we mostly talked about, where we interviewed all of the grief survivors, and it's a little more thorough. We show more of their story, and each person is holding a memento that reminds them of their loved one. And then the grief workbook is similar to Kicking Cancer, where it's a workbook and has some journaling pages, but it's all about grief and remembering. So there's a lot of prompts to remember your loved one. Some of them are pretty fun. We have a, funeral bingo. We have all kinds of like goofy things in there that people really enjoy. And then our new release is Seasons Griefings, and that's the last one there. So Seasons Griefings is, it kind of like pays homage to the fact that the holidays are horrible and hard when you are grieving. So it's like, you can remember what your loved one liked to do during the holidays. You can draw an ornament for your loved one. We've got like all kinds of funny, quirky things in there. So, and that's like our newest. So we would love to share that with all of you. And you can reach us all at the information below. We're on Instagram, and as Luna Peak Foundation is more of the cancer stuff, and Snapshots of Life After Loss is more of the grief side. But you can find everything at lunapeakfoundation.org, and all of these books are available on lunapeakpublishing.com as well as Amazon. But we'd love to hear from all of you. And if you do get any of these books, we love for people to send us photos if they're comfortable sharing.
If you guys have any questions. Okay, we're just seeing the chat now. So sorry, we're a little delayed on seeing this.
See that people use humor to help cope, and that is still our go-to. It's our favorite thing to do. So please follow us so that you can see those memes that we like to post. We just did if grief was Halloween candy. So we had a lot of really funny Halloween candy memes, and how the candy sticks to your teeth and things like that. It's really fun. So I'm seeing a lot of sharing. Thank you for sharing your stories with us. If anyone has any questions, like specific, we're happy to answer. Okay, so we're reading a comment that they had the bear weigh the exact same amount as the stillborn child. That's actually really powerful.
How do you care for yourself as a death doula?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's such a privilege to show up for somebody at their end of life. And if they choose to let you into that circle and for you to experience such a profound moment and end of their life, it's really huge. So it is a great privilege. But having said that, it's so important to know your boundaries. And I think, we've talked a lot about what are your goals as a patient going through it? What are your goals in the dying process, or whatever you want to choose for treatment? But on the other side of that, when you are a death doula, you need to come in with exact boundaries and limitations, what you want to come in and help with. And that's kind of set up at the beginning of, signing a contract and agreeing the type of needs that you're going to care for. So in some cases, if you're signing up to do legacy work, it's, getting their story, and hopefully you can pace that out and make sure that you have solid self-care practices on the other side of that. Because it's a lot to show up for someone. And even when it's really beautiful work and you want to be there, that absolutely takes a toll on you as well. So it's kind of both of those things.
Well, what a very intense but informational and beautiful session. Thank you so much for being a part of it with us. And we want to let you know that next you have the option of joining I've Lost My Keys and I Don't Have the Energy to Find Them, Amplifying the Needs of Caregivers, or NSCLC Voices, Addressing Barriers to Optimal Healthcare in Underserved Communities. Thank you so much, Gracelyn and Melody. It was absolutely a wonderful session. And thank you to our participants for joining us. And we hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.